With 30 minutes to go before the ceremony, Ethan Montgomery's first love came back into his life. Instead of walking down the aisle, he told me to stay put for an hour while he raced to the airport, desperate to buy himself a sense of closure for the one that got away. Nobody in his inner circle called him out on it. Instead, his groomsmen stood in the suite, swirling their scotch, offering quiet, sympathetic sighs. Honestly, if Ethan hadn't completely given up on himself back then, a girl with her background wouldn't have let him anywhere near her. And they were right, wasn't it? He had an Ivy League PhD and a family tree rooted in Boston old money. I had a state school bachelor's and a mother who raised me alone on a seamstress's wage. I had spent 5 years acutely aware of the chasm between us, walking on eggshells, terrified of making a fool of him. For 5 long years, his friends had treated me like a place filler. And in the end, so had Ethan. The bone ing of my custom bridal corset suddenly felt suffocating, cutting into my ribs like dull knives. I pulled out my phone and sent a quick text to the wedding coordinator. The bride is changing. Please prepare accordingly. I had been standing in the corner of the suite for 10 minutes, silent as wallpaper, when one of his groomsmen finally turned to me. Cassidy, look, it's the biggest moment of Ethan's life. Just try to be understanding, okay? I stared at him, my heart dropping through the floorboards. If meeting up with Scarlett Albright is the biggest moment of his life, then what the hell is marrying me? None of them saw anything wrong with it. I pulled out my phone, my fingers trembling as I dialed Ethan's number. The line rang and rang, chiming endlessly in the heavy silence of the room, until it went straight to voicemail. From the exact second Ethan and I started dating, I had been waiting for this wedding. 5 years of waiting. Out in the grand ballroom, hundreds of guests were already taking their seats. My mother, who had broken her back her entire life just to give me a decent upbringing, was sitting in the front row, waiting to watch me finally step into my own happiness. Panic roared in my chest like a flashfire. All I wanted was an explanation from the man I was supposed to marry. When I dialed a second time, the ringing made one of Ethan's friends groan in irritation. What are you spiraling for, Cass? He said, an hour tops. Yeah, turn the phone off, another added, flicking an ash into a glass tray. The noise is getting annoying. Their casual disdain cut straight through me. They had never spoken to me with a grain of respect. And the most humiliating part was that I had spent 5 years silently permitting it. 5 years ago, Ethan's mother was pushing him hard into setup dates with girls from their country club network. Instead of going along with it, he showed up on my street. It was a freezing December night. I was outside helping my mother drag crates of winter produce into our tiny grocery shop, snow dusting my hair and shoulders. Suddenly, a dark umbrella drifted over my head, blocking the wind. I looked up, and there he was, tall, impossibly handsome, his voice ice cold in the winter air. Cassidy, be my girlfriend. It wasn't a proposal or a question. It was a demand delivered by someone who knew I would never say no. And why would I? I had been orbiting his universe for years, a quiet ghost in the background since high school. Back then, just buying him a Gatorade after a basketball game was enough to keep me floating for a week. My feelings were utterly transparent, my devotion entirely worthless. I worked myself to the bone to get into the same university, hoping to bump into him in a crowded hallway and pretend it was fate. I had spent months rehearsing a casual, "Oh, what a coincidence." But before I could ever say it, Ethan's eyes had already fallen on Scarlett Albright. They dated, they fought, they filled the campus with their dramatic, tempestuous romance. And when Scarlett vanished abroad right after graduation without a word, Ethan's pride kept him from begging her to stay. He simply let her go. And then his gaze had landed on me. God, I was so thrilled back then. I remembered staring at him with wide, hopeful eyes, treating his barest attention like a sacred gift, never stopping to realize that in his eyes, I was just the dirt beneath his shoes. When he made us official, he brought me to a dinner with his old fraternity brothers. They took one look at me in my off-the-rack dress and openly sighed. Ethan, man, you'd be better off flying to London to fetch Scarlett back. Seriously, if you bring her to the alumni galas, you're losing the room before you even walk in. I remembered the way my knuckles turned white against the hem of my dress, my ears ringing as if I'd been slapped in front of a crowd. I looked at Ethan, silently praying he would say something, anything, to protect me. She's my girlfriend. Watch your mouth. Instead, Ethan just swirled the bourbon in his glass, his heavy eyelids lowered, uttering not a single word of defense. The amber liquid caught the chandelier light, stinging my eyes until they watered. I squeezed my spine straight, swallowing my shame, and spent the rest of the night comforting myself. Scarlett is brilliant. He's just coming off a brutal heartbreak. It's normal. I fed myself those lies over and over again, but no matter how much I swallowed, the bitterness kept leaking out. Standing in the bridal suite now, listening to those same men excitedly speculate about Ethan and Scarlett's emotional airport reunion, a thought suddenly struck me. Would they ever dare speak to Scarlett like this? No. They'd be smiling, pouring her champagne, calling her Scarlett darling. Because they knew Scarlett was valued. She was dangerous to cross. I, on the other hand, was entirely expendable. My hand went limp, and I locked my phone screen. Down in my messages, the event manager sent a final confirmation. Ms. Miller, are you absolutely certain you want to replace the bride? I looked around the room, at the empty groom's suit hanging on the rack, at the men who didn't even bother to look me in the eye. My mind had never felt so painfully, brilliantly clear. Replace her. I turned around and walked straight back into the bridal dressing room. The moment the door clicked shut, my maid of honor, Harper, rushed over, grabbing my shoulders. In less than 15 minutes, rumors had already ripped through the back hall. The groom had ditched his own wedding to chase down his ex at Logan Airport. I had officially become the punchline of the day. Harper was cursing up a storm, her face red with fury, though her eyes were terrified that I was going to swallow my pride and wait for him anyway. When I quietly told her I was done and wanted to go home, she let out a breath so hard her shoulders dropped. She immediately moved behind me, unzipping the heavy, suffocating layers of the gown, helping me carefully lift it off and mount it back onto the mannequin. It was a $100,000 piece of haute couture, encrusted with hundreds of tiny seed pearls that caught the vanity lights like crushed glass. Harper watched me staring at it. Do you feel bad leaving a dress like that behind? No, I said softly. There was nothing to mourn about it, because the dress had never belonged to a happy story. Ethan had always hated the idea of a wedding. Between his research firm and his family's obligations, he didn't want to waste time on what he called performative circus acts. This wedding, and this dress, had only happened because I had completely broken down and fought for it. In our 5 years together, I had never once felt grounded. I had seen how Ethan loved when he actually cared. I knew that when he was with Scarlett, no matter how brutal his academic workload was, he'd spend weeks secretly planning elaborate birthday trips for her. I'd seen the archived videos of the surprise fireworks show he had bought her over the harbor, and the stories of him standing outside her dorm in a blizzard for 3 hours just so they could walk in the snow together until their hair turned white. With me, 5 years yielded nothing but his schedule. On my last birthday, I had waited all day with foolish, fluttering anticipation, wondering what thoughtful surprise he might have planned. At 6 in the evening, his executive assistant delivered an American Express card to our apartment with a brief note. Buy yourself whatever you like. On our anniversary, I cooked a 4-course meal and sat at the dining table until 2 in the morning. When he finally stumbled in, exhausted from work, he glanced at the cold food and said, "Don't wait up next time. It's impractical." I tried asking for weekend trips, for couples portraits, for a proper proposal. Every single time, he brushed me off with a single word, busy. He called those things superficial, claiming true commitment didn't need useless theater. But I needed those useless things. I desperately needed some tangible proof that he loved me, even if it was just a tiny, microscopic slice of the love he had given someone else. I got nothing. I spent countless nights lying awake beside his quiet, rhythmic breathing, staring at the ceiling and asking myself, am I just not good enough? Is that why I don't deserve his effort? Every time the thought crossed my mind, I'd cry into my pillow until my throat burned. My weight dropped. I lost my appetite. I knew I was slowly dying inside, just as I was trying to make peace with the emptiness, telling myself that maybe a life without a wedding was fine as long as I had him. Scarlett posted a throwback on her blog. The caption read, "Remembering when he spent an entire night designing our dream wedding." Accompanying the post was a photo of Ethan's distinct, elegant handwriting detailing a complete wedding itinerary, complete with hand-drawn sketches of a custom lace gown he had designed for her himself. That was the night I finally lost my mind. I tore through our apartment like a wild animal, smashing vases, sweeping his expensive crystal off the counters, sobbing until I couldn't breathe. Ethan had stood in the doorway, watching me with cold disgust. "Cassidy, are you really this shallow? You're throwing a hysterical fit over a party." "Yes," I screamed, tears streaming down my neck. "If there's no wedding, there's no marriage. We're done." I locked myself in the guest room for 3 days without eating or drinking. In the end, he caved. He told me we could have the wedding, get the dress, do whatever I wanted. But the gown was picked out by a stylist he hired. The itinerary was drafted entirely by an event management agency. Ethan operated like a wealthy donor checking off a line item. He showed up only when a signature was required. On the day of my dress fitting, he glanced at me for 3 seconds, said, "Looks fine," and immediately stepped out to take a conference call. When the invitations went out, his friends mocked me behind my back. Never underestimate a desperate woman. She actually cried and threw a tantrum until Ethan agreed to put a ring on it. I had dragged that heavy, suffocating boulder all the way to the finish line. And now, I was finally letting it drop. Dressed in a pair of loose jeans and a simple cotton sweater, I looked at Harper and managed a genuine smile. "Go pull the car around to the side entrance. I'm going to get my mom, and then we're going home." I jogged toward the main reception hall, but the moment I turned the corner into the VIP holding room, my feet froze. Victoria Montgomery sat in a high-backed velvet armchair, her leather handbag resting across her lap, her posture immaculate, her brow pinched in deep distaste. My mother was standing in front of her like a scuffed, obedient doll, repeating a set of physical posture drills under Victoria's sharp instruction. Mom had worked manual labor her whole life. She was small, frail, and her shoulders were permanently rounded from years over a sewing machine. When she bowed her head, she looked tiny next to Ethan's mother. Mom's elbow sagged half an inch out of line. Without warning, Victoria snapped her silk-ribbed folding fan down hard across my mother's weathered knuckles. Clack. The sharp crack echoed in the empty room. My mother gasped, flinching hard as she pulled her hand back, looking at Victoria with wide, helpless eyes. A terrible, boiling heat rushed into my skull. I sprinted across the polished floor, stepping directly between my mother and Victoria, my voice shaking with rage. What the hell do you think you're doing to my mother? Victoria didn't even blink. I am teaching her basic decorum, so she doesn't embarrass us out there. What are you screaming about? My mother, panicked by Victoria's darkening expression, frantically pulled at my sleeve, forcing a timid smile. Cass, sweetie, don't be rude. Your mother-in-law is just trying to help. It's your big day. I don't want to mess it up. Her desperate, pleading submission tore my heart to shreds. The word mother-in-law only made Victoria's sneer deepen. Get back in line and finish the posture exercises, Victoria commanded my mother, her tone as cold as marble. I won't have you looking like a street vendor in front of the senator's family. Yes, of course, Mom murmured, stepping forward again. I grabbed my mother's wrists, holding her firmly behind me. For the first time in 5 years, I locked eyes with Victoria Montgomery without dropping my gaze. Mrs. Montgomery, my mother is supposed to be your equal today. Walking all over her like she's your housemaid. Do you have any idea how grotesque that is? Victoria's eyes narrowed into slits. Talking back to your elders? Is this the pathetic excuse for manners your family brought into my home? A bitter, hysterical laugh bubbled up in my chest. Manners. It was always about their superior manners. The very first time Ethan took me to his family's estate in Beacon Hill, Victoria had pulled me aside into the parlor to inform me that the Montgomerys were a legacy family with deep European roots. I was from a different social class, she said, and if I wanted to stay near Ethan, I had to learn my place. Back then, desperate not to embarrass Ethan, I swallowed every insult. When I slouched slightly at the dinner table, she slammed her silverware down and dismissed me from the meal. I took it. When I drank my tea too quickly during afternoon service, she deliberately tipped her hot cup onto my wrist to teach me control. I took that too. I endured it because I was young, foolish, and believed that sacrifice was the price of love. But why on earth should my gentle, hard-working mother have to bow her head to these monsters? I stared into Victoria's cold, arrogant eyes, my teeth clenching until my jaw ached. Do you even know where your son is right now? Victoria smoothed her skirt calmly. Of course. He went to collect Scarlett from her flight. You will sit quietly and wait for him to return. I sucked in a breath of frigid hall air, my skin turning ice cold. I am not waiting for him. What did you just say? Whether he comes back in 10 minutes or 10 hours, I am not marrying him. A dead silence hung in the air for 3 seconds before Victoria let out a low, amused puff of air. Cassidy, who do you think you're throwing a mood at? Do you honestly think you have the leverage to play hardball with us? I opened my mouth to rage at her. But suddenly, an overwhelming tide of exhaustion washed over me. What was the point? Explaining myself to a woman who viewed me as vermin was a complete waste of breath. Come on, Mom, I said softly, taking my mother's hand and turning toward the exit. Behind us, one of Victoria's assistants asked nervously, Mrs. Montgomery, should we call Mr. Ethan and tell him to come back immediately? Victoria's dismissive voice drifted down the corridor, loud enough for us to hear every word. Let her walk. A stray cat thinks it can turn into a pedigree just by making a scene? The Montgomery family doesn't cater to common tantrums. She'll be begging on her knees by nightfall. Every sentence they spoke was a poisoned dart, piercing my heart until it was shredded beyond recognition. But as we stepped out into the crisp afternoon air, I realized something wonderful. I was finally pulling the darts out. I held my mother's hand tightly as we walked toward the curb, where Harper's car pulled up to the ring. As I opened the back door for my mother, a sob finally tore past my lips. Mom, I'm so sorry. I wept, bowing my head against her frail shoulder. I made you suffer so much for my own stupidity. When I first started dating Ethan, I told myself his family was just distant because they didn't know me yet. 5 years later, I told myself they were cold because I hadn't officially crossed the threshold into their family. It was all pathetic self-deception. They didn't lack familiarity. They lacked basic human respect for us. And I was the fool who had dragged my innocent mother into their lion's den, all to chase a high society ghost who never loved me in the first place. I should have walked away a year ago. A year ago, my mother had suffered a massive hypertensive crisis and was rushed to the ICU. The doctors warned me she might not survive the night. Terrified, surrounded by the stench of hospital disinfectant, I called Ethan, hyperventilating into the receiver. Ethan, please, can you come? My mom wants to see you. Ethan had promised he would. He said he was arranging the top cardiovascular surgeons from the university hospital and would board the next shuttle flight to be at my side within an hour. That night, I stood outside the operating room under the harsh fluorescent lights for 4 agonizing hours. Ethan never showed up. When the lights finally went off and the doctor confirmed my mother was out of immediate danger, we sat together in the sterile room, waiting for him until dawn. At 6 in the morning, my phone buzzed with a short text. Urgent work matter came up. Can't make it. My mother had squeezed my hand that morning, her voice weak and filled with sorrow. Cassie, are you sure this is the man you want to spend your life with? I choked back my tears and lied for him, claiming his research project was at a critical phase. It wasn't until 3 months later, during a drunken party, that one of his fraternity brothers let it slip. Ethan hadn't been at work that night at all. Someone had lied to him, claiming Scarlett had been spotted at the airport, and Ethan had spent 4 hours pacing the terminal concourses in the dark, calling a dead phone number. I had walked along the riverbank alone all night after finding that out, ready to break things off the moment I walked through the door. But when I got home, Ethan unexpectedly pulled out a ring and proposed. I mistook his guilt for love. Harper accelerated onto the highway, putting miles between us and the country club. Suddenly, my phone buzzed in my lap. It was Ethan. I picked it up. I'm done at the airport. Ethan's voice came through, crisp, calm, and utterly devoid of warmth. I'm heading back now. Scarlett is coming with me to the venue. She wants to give us her personal blessings. Still that same tone. Still notifying me, never asking. Okay, I said quietly. Don't read into this, Cassidy, he added, his tone clipping along. I just needed to give myself a proper sense of closure. Not a single word of apology. Then Scarlett's voice piped up near the receiver, airy and light. Cassidy. Don't be nervous, okay? Honestly, if I actually wanted to fight for him, you wouldn't be standing in that dress today anyway. She hadn't changed at all. Years ago, when she and Ethan were still together, she had marched straight into my lecture hall, slamming her notebook onto my desk in front of 80 students. A clown should know her place, she had announced loudly. Stop hovering around my boyfriend. I remembered the excruciating heat in my face as 80 pairs of eyes pinned me to my seat. My dorm mates pulled away from me after that day. Rumors spread on campus message boards that I was a desperate stalker. My entire college experience was tainted by her cruelty. I took a deep, steadying breath into the phone. Ethan, the closure you're looking for? I'm giving it to you right now. He paused, a slight edge slipping into his voice. What do you mean by that? Go take a look at the altar, I said smoothly. May you two have a long and blissful life together. In all our 5 years, Ethan was always the one to hang up first. This time I ended the call. He immediately called back. I declined it, opened his contact profile and blocked his number. Then, I began deleting everything. I deleted the videos of us hiking in Maine. I deleted the candid photo I'd taken of him asleep on the couch while taking care of me when I had the flu. I swiped back through 5 years of memories, purging them one by one, until my thumb stopped over a photo from 7 years ago. It was high school. A stray basketball had been flying toward my head at full speed, and Ethan, a head taller than me, had sprinted across the court, throwing his body over mine to take the impact. After that day, I never missed a single one of his games. During the championship final, I had pointed my cheap camera at him from the bleachers. Just as I pressed the shutter, he had unexpectedly turned toward my lens and offered a rare, faint smile. A single, heavy tear dropped from my eye, splashing onto the glass screen, blurring his smiling face. My mother gently nudged my arm. Her phone was ringing now. It was Ethan's number. I took her phone and answered it. Cassidy, stop throwing a child's temper tantrum. Ethan's voice was dark, laced with a cold anger I recognized from the night he proposed. I am already at the venue. We are getting married right now. It was the exact tone he had used that snowy night years ago. I had asked him once why he chose me out of all the girls who liked him. He had looked at me with chilling indifference and said, because heartbreak is exhausting. I wanted someone who would never leave. Ethan, I said, my voice steady and crystalline. There is no one in this world who will stay forever. I ended the call, opened my mother's settings, blocked his number, and permanently deleted the last photograph from my cloud storage. Ethan stared at his phone as the screen went black again. A sudden, unfamiliar flicker of panic flared in his chest, but he quickly extinguished it. No, Cassidy is just trying to scare me. She's probably waiting inside the bridal suite right now, waiting for me to go in and placate her. He shoved his phone into his jacket pocket and sprinted up the marble steps toward the groom's quarters. His fraternity brothers were lounging inside, drinking scotch. When they saw him burst in disheveled, they cracked jokes. Whoa, look who decided to show up. Where's Scarlett? In the guest seating, Ethan panted, his collar slightly wrinkled, his hair messy from the wind. Where's Cassidy? Is she waiting in the main hall? The guys glanced at each other, looking mildly confused. Yeah, I guess. Isn't she usually waiting for you? Right. Ethan let out a massive, shuddering breath, his chest settling. Good. He gestured for them to follow him out. Just as he stepped into the main corridor, the wedding coordinator caught sight of him like a drowning man catching a lifeline. Mr. Montgomery. Thank God you're back, she gasped, grabbing his arm. The bride went into the hall a few minutes ago. Hurry, the procession is starting. Hearing the word bride, Ethan's eyes lit up, the last remnants of anxiety melting away. He straightened his tie and smoothed his jacket. He strode confidently through the grand double doors into the main ballroom. But the moment his polished shoes stepped onto the runner, he froze. The ballroom was half empty. Nearly all the tables on the bride's side were completely deserted, and the altar was vacant. Ethan hesitated, an icy knot tightening in his stomach. He walked swiftly down the aisle toward the officiant. Where is my bride? The officiant offered a professional, albeit strained, smile into his lapel mic. Well, it seems our groom is eager. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the bride. The house lights dimmed, and a bright, brilliant spotlight began sweeping across the room. It bounced off the floral arches, drifted over the polished dance floor, and finally locked onto a figure sitting in the third row of the guest section. It landed squarely on Scarlett Albright. The officiant's voice boomed over the speakers. Please rise for the bride, Miss Scarlett Albright. A collective gasp echoed through the hall. Scarlett sat paralyzed under the harsh beam of the spotlight, her face draining of all color, shifting from pale white to a mottled green. Ethan's face turned terrifyingly dark. He lunged toward the officiant, seizing the lapel of his jacket. What the hell are you doing? My bride is Cassidy Miller. The officiant stumbled back in utter confusion. Mr. Montgomery. Ms. Miller gave us explicit instructions an hour ago. She officially changed the bride's name on the registration sheet. She told you to change it, and you just did it. Ethan roared. You told us during the planning stage that Ms. Miller had full authority over every detail of this event. Because Ethan had found the planning tedious and useless, he had signed a waiver months ago instructing the agency to follow Cassidy's directives without question. While a normal agency might have verified such a bizarre request, the event team had spent months watching Ethan treat Cassidy like an afterthought. They felt immense sympathy for the girl who brought them coffee and planned every detail alone. And they were more than happy to execute her final command. Murmurs rippled through the audience like a spreading fire. Wait, wasn't the bride named Miller? Why did it switch to Albright? I heard the groom ran out right before the ceremony to pick up his ex-girlfriend. Is that her in the spotlight? Wow, crashing a wedding and forcing herself into the dress? That's utterly shameless. Look at the bride's family side. They're completely gone. Her mother walked out. The hushed, scathing whispers bounced off the high ceilings. Scarlett sat trapped in the glare of the spotlight, her high society composure crumbling into dust. She had spent her whole life being adored and pampered. She had never experienced a humiliation of this scale. Tears brimmed in her eyes as she looked up at the stage, her voice trembling over the whispers. Ethan, what do we do? Did she misunderstand something? Ethan turned his head, his cold eyes brushing over her face before snapping back to the coordinator. His mind was spiraling into absolute chaos over Cassidy's disappearance. He didn't have a single drop of energy left to handle Scarlett. Look at her, she's actually crying. A woman in the second row sneered loudly. Why is she crying? The real bride left. God, she reeks of desperate homewrecker. The sharp, brutal insults cut through Scarlett like glass shards. But the person whose face looked even worse than hers was Victoria Montgomery. The silence in the grand ballroom was not polite, it was predatory. Boston's old money did not shout when they witnessed blood in the water. They lowered their voices, tilted their crystal flutes, and let their eyes do the flaying. Under the blazing theater spotlight, Scarlett Albright's hand flew to her throat, her knuckles whitening against her diamond choker. For someone who had spent her entire youth orchestrating high society entrances, being summoned to the altar like an uninvited understudy in front of 300 blue bloods was a special kind of hell. Turn it off, Scarlett hissed, her voice cracking as she half rose from the gilded Chiavari chair. Turn off the damn light. The spotlight didn't move. The lighting technician, tucked away in the balcony booth and working off Cassidy's stamped checklist, held the beam steady on her pale, trembling figure. Victoria Montgomery was on her feet before the murmur reached a crescendo. Her silk file gown rustled sharply as she marched toward the stage, her posture rigid enough to snap steel. Cut the audio, Victoria commanded the sound engineer in a low, poisonous rattle. She turned to the officiant, her smile fixed with the icy perfection of a mortician. There has been an administrative error. The ceremony is postponed. Drinks will be served in the conservatory. Administrative error? A voice chimed in from the fourth row, Eleanor Cabot, whose family had looked down on the Montgomerys since the 19th century. Eleanor took a slow, theatrical sip of champagne. Victoria, darling, I didn't know your family was practicing public auditions now. Did the seamstresses' daughter refuse to sign the prenup, Or did Ethan simply decide to recycle his college luggage? A ripple of suppressed snickers broke out among the Cabot and Forbes tables. Ethan stood near the altar steps, his hands hanging limp at his sides. The collar of his bespoke tuxedo felt like an iron band welded around his trachea. His gaze darted from the empty bridal suite doors to the vacant front row where Cassidy's mother had sat, and finally down to the floral runner. A single silk petal lay crushed near the hem of his trousers. She's gone. The reality did not strike him with the crash of a falling chandelier. It seeped, in like freezing seawater, into a cracked hull. Cassidy had never walked out on him. In 5 years, no matter how cold he was, no matter how many times he had brushed off her tears with a dismissive wave, or left her waiting in an empty apartment on their anniversary, she had always been there when he woke up. She was supposed to be the anchor. She was supposed to stay still while he moved through the world. Ethan. Victoria snapped, reaching him and digging her manicured fingers into his forearm with bruising force. Stop standing there like a statue. Escort Scarlett out the private entrance before the press catches wind of this. We will issue a statement this evening that the wedding was mutually called off due to scheduling incompatibilities. Ethan blinked, slowly looking down at his mother's grip. Scheduling incompatibilities. Do you have a better lie? Victoria hissed, her voice vibrating with mortification. Look around you. The Miller girl deliberately orchestrated this to humiliate us. She is low-class, vindictive, and completely unhinged. You should be thanking God you didn't legally tie your name to hers. Ethan looked past his mother's shoulder. Scarlett had hurried up the aisle, her face mottled red beneath her foundation, her eyes rimmed with angry tears. Ethan, she whimpered, reaching out to touch his lapel. How could you let her do this to me? I came here to give you my blessing and she made me look like a joke. Ethan looked at Scarlett's face, the face he had spent 5 years projecting onto every rainy window, every empty glass of scotch, every quiet evening when Cassidy was folding his shirts in the next room. For 5 years, he had believed Scarlett was his great, tragic romance. He had told himself that his emotional detachment from Cassidy was noble, that he was a man ruined by a grand love, tragically settling for the mundane. Yet looking at Scarlett now, shivering with shallow vanity, shrieking about her ruined reputation while Cassidy's quiet, crystalline farewell echoed in his head, a sickening sensation rose in his throat. There is no one in this world who will stay forever. You said. Ethan began, his voice barely a rasp. What? Scarlett asked, sniffing. You said in the car that if you wanted to fight for me, she wouldn't be in that dress anyway. Ethan pulled his arm away from his mother's grip, stepping back. You laughed at her on the phone. Ethan, this is hardly the time, Victoria began. Shut up, Ethan said. Victoria froze, her jaw dropping in sheer disbelief. In 32 years her son had never used that tone with her. Ethan. His best man Julian hurried up, trying to smooth the air. Bro, calm down. Let's just head back to your place, open a bottle of Macallan and figure out how to spin this. Cassidy's just having an emotional breakdown. Give her 2 days to cool off, and she'll come crawling back. Where else is she gonna go? Ethan looked at Julian. He looked at the groomsmen who had spent the last 5 years mocking Cassidy's thrift store blazers, rolling their eyes when she brought homemade sliders to their tailgates, and treating her like a temporary maid who happened to share Ethan's bed. And Ethan had stood by and let them do it. He had called it keeping the peace. She isn't coming back, Ethan whispered. Before any of them could speak, Ethan tore the white ranunculus boutonniere from his lapel, threw it onto the marble floor, and walked straight past them toward the exit. The small brick row house in South Boston smelled of steamed ginger, old wool, and cedar chips. Cassidy stood in her childhood bedroom, her sleeves pushed up to her elbows, packing the remnants of her life into 2 sturdy cardboard boxes. She had already stripped her phone of everything connected to Ethan Montgomery. Her banking app was cleared. She had transferred the small savings from her freelance styling work into an independent credit union account, declining the joint allowance Ethan had deposited every month like a corporate stipend. In the living room, her mother, Helen, was sitting at the vintage Singer sewing machine, quietly hemming a bolt of navy linen for a neighborhood client. Her foot pumped the cast iron treadle with a steady, soothing rhythm. Clack-whir, clack-whir. Harper walked in from the kitchen, holding 3 steaming mugs of chamomile tea. She set one on Cassidy's desk and took a long sip from her own. My brother just texted me, Harper said, leaning against the doorframe. Works security at the country club. Apparently, the ballroom cleared out within 20 minutes. Victoria Montgomery tried to claim the caterer had a food safety breach, but Eleanor Cabot told the entire valet line that the bride dumped the groom and assigned his ex to the altar. Cassidy didn't stop taping the cardboard seam. Eleanor Cabot has hated Victoria since their boarding school days. She won't let her live this down for a decade. Good, Harper said with vicious satisfaction. Let them choke on their silver spoons. Helen paused her foot on the treadle. She pushed her reading glasses down her nose and looked at her daughter. Cassie. Cassidy stopped, the packing tape dispenser hovering in her hands. Yeah, Mom. Your hands are shaking, sweetheart. Cassidy looked down. Her fingers were trembling against the brown cardboard. She wasn't shaking from grief. She was shaking from the sheer, terrifying adrenaline of someone who had just stepped off a speeding train and realized she was miraculously unbroken. I'm fine, Mom, Cassidy said softly. Really? I kept waiting for the sky to fall if I ever said no to him. I thought my whole world would disappear. The sky doesn't fall for selfish men, baby, Helen said gently, her voice worn smooth by decades of quiet endurance. They just take up all the air in the room until you forget how to breathe on your own. You're breathing now. A sharp, heavy knock thudded against the front door downstairs. Harper immediately set her mug down, her eyes narrowing. If that's his fraternity goons, I'm getting the cast iron skillet. It's Ethan, Cassidy said quietly. She walked down the narrow wooden stairs, Harper trailing close behind. Through the frosted glass panel of the front door, she could see the tall, broad-shouldered silhouette standing on the small concrete stoop. Outside, a light Boston drizzle had begun to fall, turning the asphalt black and slick. Cassidy did not unlock the deadbolt. She pulled the brass chain tight and opened the door 2 inches. Ethan stood in the rain. He had abandoned his overcoat. His tuxedo jacket was soaked through at the shoulders, the dark wool clinging heavily to his frame. His immaculate Ivy League haircut was plastered against his forehead, and his silver cufflinks caught the pale glow of the street lamp behind him. When he saw Cassidy's face through the narrow gap, something raw and desperate cracked across his features. Cassidy, he breathed, reaching a hand out toward the door before catching himself. Open the door, please. No, Cassidy said. Her voice was level, quiet, and completely devoid of the trembling compliance he was used to. We need to talk, Ethan said, his chest heaving as if he had run 5 miles. What happened at the venue? It was a misunderstanding. I went to the airport because I needed to close that chapter once and for all. I didn't want any ghosts in our marriage. I did it for us. A small, sad smile touched the corners of Cassidy's lips. Ethan, you went to the airport on our wedding day because the thought of Scarlett Albright breathing the same city air as you without your knowledge was more important than my dignity, my mother's pride, and 5 years of my life. That's not true. Ethan raised his voice, his hand gripping the wooden doorframe. I brought her to the venue so she could see us. I wanted her to watch me marry you. Which makes it even worse, Cassidy said, her voice dropping into a razor-sharp whisper. You didn't want to marry me because you loved me. You wanted to use me as a prop to prove to your ex-girlfriend that you had moved on. Ethan froze. The rain dripped from the tip of his nose, running down his pale cheek like a cold tear. I was never a person to you, Ethan, Cassidy continued, staring directly into the dark, panicked eyes that had held her captive for 7 years. I was an ointment for your wounded pride. I was a maid who didn't ask for a salary, a date who didn't embarrass your mother too much, and a body to fill the passenger seat of your Porsche. Cassidy, that's not true. Ethan's voice cracked. He leaned closer to the gap, his knuckles whitening against the wet jam. I bought the ring. I signed the venue contract. I was ready to give you everything. You gave me a schedule, Cassidy said. And now your appointment is over. Don't do this, Ethan choked out, his aristocratic composure shattering. Entirely. Come back to the apartment. We'll fire the coordinator. We'll elope to Italy next week. Just you and me. No mother, no friends, no Scarlett. Just come home. I am home, Cassidy said. She reached for the brass latch. Cassidy. Ethan slammed his palm against the door. If you close this door, there's no coming back. Do you hear me? You walk away now, and you have nothing. No network, no funding, no references in this city. My mother will blackball you from every design firm in New England. Cassidy paused, her hand on the lock. She looked at him through the narrow crack, not with anger, not with hatred, but with a profound, chilling pity. Your mother already tried to ruin my mother's hands today, Cassidy said softly. The difference is my mother built a life with her hands. Your family only knows how to destroy things with their mouths. She clicked the deadbolt into place. Through the heavy oak door, she heard his frantic fist thudding against the wood. Cassidy, open the door. Cassidy turned around, walked past Harper, and climbed the stairs back to her room. With every step, the phantom weight of $100,000 haute couture corset dissolved from her ribs, leaving nothing behind but the clean, steady rhythm of her own breath. The Montgomery penthouse on Commonwealth Avenue had never felt so vast, or so completely lifeless. Ethan stood in the center of the kitchen at 2 in the morning, the harsh pendant lights glaring off the polished Calacatta marble counters. The silence in the apartment was deafening. He walked over to the stainless steel refrigerator, pulling the door open. Usually, on Sunday nights, the third shelf was lined with 4 glass meal prep containers, slow-cooked short ribs with rosemary, ginger chicken broth, and roasted seasonal vegetables, each labeled with a small piece of masking tape in Cassidy's rounded, neat handwriting. Heat for 3 minutes. Add chili flakes if tired. The third shelf was bare. There was only a jar of expired Dijon mustard and an unopened carton of oat milk. Ethan grabbed the oat milk, poured it into a glass, and took a sip. It was sour. He slammed the glass into the sink, the impact shattering the crystal into 3 jagged shards. He walked into the master bedroom. The walk-in closet was split down the middle. On the left hung his bespoke suits, his cashmere overcoats, his rows of handmade Italian Oxfords. On the right were Cassidy's thrifted sundresses, soft wool cardigans, and sketchbooks. Had lived for 3 years, there was only empty brass hangers clinking against each other in the air-conditioned draft. On the vanity table, she had left 3 items. 1. The platinum and sapphire engagement ring he had given her. 2. The black American Express supplementary card, completely unused. 3. The small silver key to his Porsche. Beside them lay no note. Not a single line of reproach. Not a word of farewell. She had excised herself from his existence with surgical precision, leaving no tissue behind to mourn. Ethan sank onto the edge of the king-sized bed, burying his face in his hands. His phone on the nightstand began to vibrate violently. He grabbed it without looking, his heart leaping into his throat. Cassidy. Ethan, it's Julian. The leap in his chest flattened into a dull, leaden ache. What do you want? Bro, turn on your laptop, Julian said, his tone unusually tense. Someone just leaked the security footage from the bridal holding suite to the Boston Socialité blog. Ethan's jaw tightened. What footage? The one where your mother slapped Cassidy's mom with her folding fan. Ethan's breath hitched. What? It's everywhere, man, Julian said, his voice dropping into uneasy anxiety. The audio is crystal clear. Your mom telling Helen Miller she looks like a street vendor, and Cassidy stepping in. Ethan, the Cabot family's legal foundation just announced they're pulling their $5 million endowment from your research institute's annual gala. They cited ethical incompatibility with foundational leadership. Ethan hung up the phone. He opened his laptop with trembling hands. The video was pinned to the top of every local lifestyle portal. Boston dynasty exposed. Montgomery family matriarch physically assaults working-class mother at society wedding. Below the video, the comment section was a slaughterhouse. I always knew Victoria Montgomery was a monster, but striking and elderly. Seamstress? Vile. The bride took her mother and walked out like a queen. Good for her. Did you hear the groom left her at the altar to pick up his rich ex at Logan? The whole family is trash. Boycott Montgomery Biotech. Ethan stared at the screen, his chest tightening until he could barely draw air. He clicked on the video. He watched Cassidy, small, wearing a cheap cotton sweater, her eyes blazing with a ferocious, protective dignity he had never once seen during their 5 years together. For 5 years, he had believed she was timid. He had believed she had no spine, because she always lowered her eyes when his friends mocked her, always apologized when his mother criticized her table manners, always smiled when he gave her crumbs. She hadn't been weak. She had simply loved him enough to swallow her pride for 5 years, until he made the fatal mistake of attacking the only thing she loved more than him. Her mother. A cold, agonizing realization settled into his bones. Cassidy hadn't lost a high society marriage today. He had lost the only person in the world who would have stood by him if his entire empire turned to dust. 6 months later, New York City. The scent of espresso, steam irons, and raw mulberry silk filled the bright, airy loft on West 27th Street in Chelsea. Cassidy stood in front of a linen-covered dress form, a row of pearl-headed pins held between her lips, her shears slicing through a bolt of midnight blue velvet with fluid, practiced precision. Beside her, Helen sat at an industrial Juki sewing machine, her weathered fingers guiding an intricate gold thread embroidery border along the hem of a tailored evening cape. Keep the tension slightly looser on the curve, Mom, Cassidy said around the pins, stepping back to assess the silhouette. When the client walks, the velvet should catch the light like liquid ink. Got it, boss, Helen smiled, her eyes crinkling behind her new titanium reading glasses. The bell above the heavy oak door chimed. Harper stepped into the studio, shaking the rain from her umbrella and holding up a box of fresh almond croissants from the French bakery around the corner. The final RSVP list for the Manhattan Young Designers Showcase just dropped, Harper announced, tossing the clipboard onto the cutting table. Vogue runway. Confirmed their senior editor is attending your segment tonight, Cass. Cassidy took the pins from her lips and stuck them into the wrist cushion. And the front row allocations. All 12 slots taken by international buyers, Harper grinned, leaning over to steal a glance at the velvet cape. The French luxury conglomerate Maison Laurent asked for a private viewing of your heritage seamstress capsule collection before the runway even starts. Cassidy looked around the bright loft. When she had left Boston 6 months ago, she had $6,200 in savings and a sketchbook filled with architectural silhouettes inspired by vintage garment worker workwear. She hadn't accepted a single cent of Montgomery money. Instead, she had submitted an anonymous portfolio to the New York Fashion Council's independent fellowship. Her collection, built entirely around handcrafted tailoring, raw silks, and the invisible labor of generational working-class women, had won the grand prize, including a 6-month studio residency in Chelsea. She had spent 6 months working 16 hours a day. Her skin was clear, her posture was tall and proud, and the hollow, haunted look that had shadowed her eyes for 5 years had completely vanished. There's one more thing, Harper said, her smile faltering slightly. Cassidy paused, tying her hair back into a sleek, high ponytail. What is it? The Boston delegation arrived for the showcase, Harper said quietly. Apparently, Montgomery Biotech is one of the co-sponsors for the Metropolitan Innovation Pavilion across the hall. Ethan is here. The name didn't cause Cassidy's heart to seize. It didn't make her breath catch. It felt like hearing the name of a distant acquaintance from an elementary school she had long forgotten. He's an attendee, Cassidy said, picking up her chalk to mark a dart line. I'm a designer. We aren't in the same business. The Metropolitan Exhibition Center in Hudson Yards was packed with 3,000 guests from the global fashion, finance, and philanthropic sectors. Ethan Montgomery stood near the champagne bar in the VIP lounge, holding a glass of sparkling water he hadn't touched in 40 minutes. He looked thinner. The sharp, aristocratic angles of his jaw had sharpened into something gaunt, and faint streaks of silver had begun to touch his dark temples. His tuxedo was impeccable, but the effortless, careless arrogance that had defined his youth was completely gone. Beside him, Scarlett Albright was chattering anxiously, clutching a silver clutch. Ethan, your mother said we should introduce ourselves to the Laurent Group's managing director. If they partner with your firm's biomedical textile patent, the board will finally stop questioning your position. Ethan didn't answer. He hadn't looked at Scarlett in 20 minutes. In the 6 months since the wedding disaster, his life had disintegrated in slow motion. The video of his mother had triggered a public relations nightmare that cost his institute 2 major state research grants. When he finally broke things off with Scarlett permanently 3 months ago, Scarlett's father had retaliated by pulling his family's investment syndicate from Ethan's secondary fund. His mother was currently in self-imposed exile at their Newport cottage, avoiding every charity committee that had once begged for her presence. And Ethan had spent every single night in that empty Commonwealth penthouse, drinking himself to sleep while looking at the empty third shelf of his refrigerator. Ladies and gentlemen, the announcer's voice echoed through the soaring atrium. Please take your seats for the debut presentation of the year, the Ethel Collection by Cassidy Miller. Ethan's glass slipped from his fingers. It hit the carpet with a dull, muffled thud, water soaking into the wool pile. Ethan. Scarlett frowned, looking at him in annoyance. What are you doing? Ethan didn't hear her. He was already pushing past the velvet stanchions, moving toward the runway amphitheater like a man possessed. The lights in the main hall dimmed to a deep, moody indigo. A single cello began to play, a low, haunting melody that resonated through the floorboards. The spotlight flared. The first model stepped onto the runway. She wore an ivory wool coat with structured, razor-sharp lapels, but the inner lining was embroidered with raw, golden silk threads that flowed like water with every stride. It was powerful, breathtakingly elegant, and fierce, a masterclass in structural architecture meeting human warmth. Look after look followed. Tailored trousers cut with impossible precision, dresses that seemed to float like spun cloud, each piece carrying the unmistakable signature of a woman who understood how to turn fabric into armor. The final look appeared. The model wore a gown of midnight blue velvet, the hem embroidered with a cascading constellation of antique gold stitches that caught the runway lights. Like stars in an open sky, the crowd erupted. Fashion critics who usually sat with stone faces were on their feet, applauding with genuine, unbridled fervor. The creative director of Maison Laurent was clapping rhythmically, nodding with an expression of pure, predatory admiration. The music swelled. The curtain at the head of the runway parted. Cassidy stepped out. She wore a simple, tailored black suit of her own design, her hair swept back, her jaw high, her skin glowing under the warm arc lights. She walked to the center of the runway, offered a graceful, serene bow, and smiled. It was not the timid, nervous smile she had worn at the Beacon Hill dinner tables. It was the radiant, untouchable smile of an empress who had conquered her own kingdom. In the fourth row of the VIP bleachers, Ethan stood paralyzed. His breath caught in his throat, a sharp, burning pain tearing through his chest. That's Cassidy, the girl who used to wait for me in the rain with a thermos of chicken soup. The girl who folded my shirts with lavender water. The girl I threw away for a ghost. The backstage area after the show was a chaotic swirl of models, photographers, and luxury buyers waving contract folders. Cassidy stood near the styling rack, holding her mother's hand as the CEO of Maison Laurent handed them both his personal business card embossed in gold leaf. Mademoiselle Miller, the Frenchman said in his lyrical accent, bowing slightly over her knuckles. The board of directors wishes to invite you and Madame Miller to Paris next month to finalize the global distribution rights for Ethel. You have created something truly extraordinary. Thank you, Monsieur Laurent, Cassidy smiled. My mother and I will be delighted to attend. As the executive team moved away, the security guard at the backstage curtain cleared his throat. Ms. Miller, there's a gentleman outside the VIP barrier. He says he needs to speak with you. He claims it's an emergency. Cassidy turned. Through the parting in the black velvet curtains, Ethan stood in the hallway. He was being held back by two private security personnel. He had torn his bow tie loose. His shirt collar was open, his face pale and glistening with sweat. When his eyes locked onto hers, he stopped struggling against the guards, his chest heaving. Helen's grip on Cassidy's hand tightened slightly. It's okay, Mom, Cassidy said softly, patting her mother's weathered knuckles. Wait for me inside with Harper. I'll be 2 minutes. Cassidy walked through the velvet curtain into the quiet corridor. She gestured for the security guards to step back 10 paces. Ethan took 2 stumbling steps forward, stopping 5 feet away as if afraid that coming any closer would make her vanish into thin air. Cassidy, he choked out. Mr. Montgomery, Cassidy said. Her voice was cool, polite, and completely devoid of inflection. Congratulations on your textile patent sponsorship. If you have inquiries regarding commercial collaboration with Ethel, my business manager Harper handles all scheduling. Every word was a razor blade coated in ice. Don't do this, Ethan begged, his voice breaking as he reached out a trembling hand toward her sleeve, not daring to make contact. Cassidy, I saw the show. You were magnificent. Thank you. I was wrong, Ethan whispered, tears finally welling in his bloodshot eyes and spilling down his gaunt cheeks. I was blind, I was arrogant, I was an idiot. For 5 years, I had the most brilliant, beautiful woman in the world by my side, and I treated you like wallpaper. Cassidy watched him quietly, her hands resting comfortably in the pockets of her tailored trousers. I haven't slept in 6 months, Cass. Ethan wept, completely heedless of the photographers and staff passing in the distance. I walk into that apartment and all I see is your ghost. I threw Scarlett out. I cut off my mother's allowance to force her to issue a public apology to your mom. I'll give you half my company. I'll leave Boston. I'll move to New York. I'll carry your fabric bolts. I'll do whatever you want. Just please, give me one more chance. He dropped to one knee on the cold concrete floor of the backstage corridor. The heir to the Montgomery dynasty, a man whose family traced their lineage to the Mayflower, was kneeling on the floor of a convention center, begging a seamstress's daughter for a crumb of mercy. Cassidy looked down at him. She felt no satisfaction. She felt no triumphant thrill of revenge. She only felt the quiet, profound peace of a traveler looking back at a road she would never have to walk again. Ethan, Cassidy said softly. Ethan looked up, hope flaring wildly in his wet, desperate eyes. Yes, Cass. Do you remember the night you asked me to be your girlfriend? Ethan nodded frantically. In the snow, outside your mother's shop. I held an umbrella over your head. You didn't hold the umbrella over my head to keep me dry, Cassidy said, her voice crystalline and calm. You held it to block the view of the street, because you were ashamed to be seen talking to a girl from Southie. You demanded that I be your girlfriend because your pride had been shattered by Scarlett, and you needed an obedient dog who would look at you like you were a god. Ethan's face drained of every drop of color. I loved you for 7 years, Ethan, Cassidy continued gently. I loved you so much that I let you take away my confidence, my voice, and my mother's dignity. But love is like fabric. If you pull it too hard, it stretches. If you keep pulling, it frays. And on my wedding day, when you left me to chase another woman, you pulled until it snapped. I can mend it, Ethan sobbed, grabbing the hem of her trouser leg. I can fix it, Cassidy, I swear to God. Cassidy took a single step back, effortlessly slipping out of his reach. You can't mend ash, Ethan, Cassidy said. You burned it down yourself. She turned around and walked toward the backstage entrance. Cassidy! Ethan cried out, his voice echoing down the empty concrete hall like the wail of a condemned man. Cassidy! Please! Look at me! Cassidy did not look back. She pushed through the velvet curtains into the warm, bright light of her studio. Sweet! Harper was waiting with 2 glasses of vintage champagne. Helen was sitting by the vanity, holding a bouquet of white orchids sent by the president of the Fashion Council. Cassidy picked up her glass, walked over to her mother, and clinked their flutes, together with a clear, musical ping. To Paris, Mom, Cassidy smiled. To Paris, my darling, Helen replied, her eyes shining with unshed tears of pure, unadulterated pride. Behind the closed velvet curtains, the rain continued to fall over Manhattan, washing away the last traces of a 5-year winter, while inside the golden light of an unstoppable dawn filled the room.